beat is epic.
Welcome to this Epic Life podcast, where we typically explore the connection between building a conscious life and building a conscious team or a conscious business. We always break down 3 powerful permissions with our guests. These are the permission to chill, permission to feel all the feels, which is where today's topic lives, and ultimately permission to glow in the dark. My name is Christopher Carter. You may call me KC. I'm a coach for founders and executives and meditation teacher for organizations. This has been one of the most challenging topics I've ever tackled. The title has been taunting me, and I'm hoping it's a conversation we could find a way to discuss openly. It's a meditation on suicide. You can probably tell by the title of this episode that this is not going to be the typical format that we do with the interviews. A little bit different this week in that I wanted to take a step back and give myself all 3 permissions, which we'll explore in a second, and discuss a topic that might not be very comfortable on the surface. But as I've reflected more on it over the past few weeks, I just felt really compelled to share a little bit of this journey with you and offer some reflections on loss, on death, and on suicide. And let me start out of the gate here by saying this is not a meditation on my own suicide. I am perfectly fine. I have been finding so much meaning and so much joy in my family and in my soul practice and in my work with clients. I couldn't imagine going anywhere. I have so much work to do. I feel like I'm just getting started. But we did lose somebody close to us over the last couple weeks who took their life. It's brought up a lot of different fears, lessons, all the feels. So why don't we start this how we would start any interview on this Epic Life podcast, by exploring the 3 permissions. These would be the permission to chill. The voice inside has been telling me over the past week that I should take a pause and pay my respects to our good friend who we lost, and also share the lessons that he's been teaching me for these past couple weeks. So that's permission to chill for me. I have been meditating on and off throughout the day. Today is Sunday. It's more meditation than most days for me on Sundays. Periods of chanting and meditation to just kind of collect my thoughts and reflect on how this topic has impacted me and so many of us. Permission to feel all the feels. Well, that's kind of self-explanatory around this. Various waves of emotions have blown in and out over the past few weeks. More grief on my wife's side. She was much closer to our friend Zach, who we lost. For me, it's been periodic grief with lots of just confusion, pain, anger, a lot more questions and answers in so many ways. And this is an attempt to kind of reconcile all of my feels while giving myself and all of you permission to feel whatever you need to. I'm certainly not the only one who's lost somebody recently. We all experience it. And finally, permission to glow in the dark. Some guests recently, if you've been following along on the podcast, have said that permission to feel all the feels is direct access into glowing in the dark. And how I think about glowing in the dark around this topic is in a couple ways. First, in such dark, chaotic times, we need to find and use our own authentic voice. And what I am trained to do, and what I'm much more comfortable doing, I assure you, is to put on a happy face and just kind of move on with interviews, business as usual style. Not this time. I'm more interested in just reflecting and sharing, and hopefully trying to learn something and share something in the process. So that's my attempt at glowing in the dark. I'm completely unattached to success in this endeavor. I'm wide open to failure and any feedback that comes with it. Part of glowing in the dark, a big part of it, is the attempt and the effort in doing so. So there are many ways to glow in the dark. This one's mine this week, by trying to turn some pain and confusion into some lessons to share. A couple weeks ago, we were coming into a weekend and we were sleeping in a little bit, and my wife's phone woke me up with a text message. and I grabbed it off her nightstand. I kind of scanned it to just make sure it wasn't an emergency. And it was one of our friends who we don't hear from too often, who lives up the street, and said she was so devastated to hear about Zach and she couldn't believe it. And when anybody drops the D word, you kind of know it's not going to be good news. We didn't know the full extent of it. I gently woke my wife up and just let her know that she might want to check her text messages. It was likely not great news. And I headed down to make her some coffee. When she came downstairs, she kind of confirmed the worst, that not only did our friend pass, but that it seemed that he had taken his life. Immediately, the questions that assault us in this situation is why? Why would he do this? And when we get selfish and attached, we say, why would he do this to us? Why would he do this to his family? Why would he leave behind all of this amazing success that he has created for himself? Why? I don't know that we would ever scratch the surface on getting to the bottom of why anybody would take that nuclear option with their life. So maybe a much more helpful question would be, what do we know about the soul and life and the intense pressure that so many of us have been under? What do we have to learn from a seemingly incomprehensible act? What are the facts? Separate those from all of our interpretations around it, which cause us so much pain. And probably most importantly, what can we do to support everybody here who's left behind and hopefully move through a lot of the regret of what could we have done differently? I'm happy to own my own piece of that. And it's something I wanted to get off my chest a little bit as it relates to Zach, because I feel like it's applicable to so many of my other friendships. Zach was this incredible chef. He started his own restaurant a few years back called Nuevo here, a modern Mexican place in Akron, Ohio. And he recently had to close that location because of city construction. It was written up in the paper a lot. Reviews for this great menu. It's kind of the hot spot. You had to have reservations way in advance, and we ate there quite a bit. It kind of closed out of nowhere back in February, I believe. And he still had this gigantic second location up in Cleveland right on the lakefront. So we knew that no matter what, he was successful. In the article, he was interviewed, obviously, and everything was going super well for the other location. So I didn't have any, nobody had really any concerns that way, at least from our perspective. What came up for me when we learned that he passed was that I felt like I was always just missing the guy, meaning I haven't really seen him in person in so many years, and he was usually holding down the kitchen anytime we were eating in his establishment, and I never really poked my head inside the kitchen to just say hi or thank you for all the killer food or share some memories about him coming to our wedding back in the day or just give him some props. And now that he's gone, I'm fully realizing that he is somebody I absolutely should have been friends with all along. That bums me out because there's probably so many ways we could have supported one another. When I went out on my own to start my business and left my corporate life in 2016, and we would eat there, I remember being kind of freaked out for a couple of reasons. One was that I never was sure it was a great use of money to be spending so much on, custom margaritas for friends and my wife, and because I was kind of freaked out about money that year. I remember feeling a little bit intimidated and envious of him, honestly, because here's a guy who created his dream out of the ether, bootstrapped the whole thing, hired an amazing staff, seemed to create an incredible team, certainly created an incredible experience and beautiful environment and amazing menu. I mean, just all of his creativity on blast and all of his hard work and passion was just evident everywhere. And I didn't need to see him face to face to really be present to all this. I was going through a metamorphosis that year, and I didn't feel comfortable hanging with maybe a guy that had already arrived on the other side of it. It's a regret because, like I said, I never put myself out there to connect with him and to say thank you for everything. My story all along that I kind of clung to was that he's too busy. Probably barking orders, has a million plates up, and he's doing his thing back there. That's his domain. I'm not going to interrupt him. It's a story that I fear many people may have about me or any of us, so look around your life and ask yourself if you may be perceived as too busy or have so much going on, and how that might impact people's ability to reach out to you, to connect with you, to make plans with you. That's what's been hanging with me the past couple weeks since Zach's passing. I may have carefully constructed some armor and a protective shield around myself in the form of busyness. And I wonder what that costs us. Mourning his loss in our community with so many friends over so many years, going back to our wedding 20 years ago, is really a trip because you keep running into people that you probably should have been hanging out with all along. And you start hearing, some really cool stories about how many of them have kept in touch. And one of the things that Zach apparently was really good at was organizing these epic game nights. And it was a way for him to host people, play some games, put on some vinyl, usually jazz, and also just whip up some killer food. Before he opened his restaurant, he was really into experimentation and sharing his gifts and his talents and bringing his friends together. That's another thing that bums me out because the guy's house is literally only about, 3/4 of a mile away from here, if that. I would have loved to go over there, and in some ways it seems like light years away, or I was still living in another state when in actuality we're neighbors and I chose to travel the whole time. This isn't just to share my regrets around this, it's really to share the lessons that I'm taking out of it with me. One is that I declared war on busyness years ago. We may be the type of people that take on a lot of things, but being busy and advertising it is a whole different thing. So I'm really going to watch myself over the next few weeks, months, and how I use the B word and really make a concerted effort not to. I also want to start hosting game nights because, gosh, we deserve that, right? But let's go a little bit deeper into what could possibly make taking your own life an option. We know that it's a very intense time to be alive. There's the usual financial pressure, but there's also a lot of political craziness and uncertainty, constant change, weather change. All of this culminates in this just low level to high level of static and angst right under the surface. Any astrologist that I follow, Dr. Michael Lennox, we had on the program recently, he's really been talking about this energy, this unprecedented energy and planetary alignment coming into 2020. And I really think it's important to follow all of it. So it's not just about following news. I find news less and less helpful in any possible way, but just tuning into the collective energy of what's going on in an effort to maybe normalize the experience or have deeper empathy with everyone who's going through it as well. We tend to not have any idea of the types of battles that our friends and families really fight inside their heads, and that came up over and over. Again, certainly in Zach's case, I think it's safe to say we all know that just about all of us are suffering in some possible way, and we can make a better effort to better understand ourselves, what we need, and to ask for what we need. I've certainly never contemplated suicide, but recently I brought up to my coach that I was finding questions coming up that typically don't. So I was working in my backyard for the spring, helping, trying to get the yard together for the summertime. And I'm just wondering, what's all of this for? What's all this hard work about? What am I doing outside when I could be inside enjoying my people? What's with this intense push constantly? I know it's not just survival. I know it's serving others and impact and building something meaningful for down the road and building a life. And that's all great. I mean, that's what I teach. It's what I preach. It's what I coach on. And I try my best to live an example of what I coach others to do or to create. And yet these questions have come up, what's all this for? What does it matter? Very out of character for me. It just makes me realize that a death, and specifically a suicide, impacts you in just different ways. It can pull the rug out from under your feet as far as meaning goes, or knowing which end is up. If you have those feelings, they are probably normal, but you should also talk to them and give voice to them, just to know that it's not the most helpful line of thinking, but it's also not the place we typically want to design and build our lives from. It's interesting also living with a teenage girl, because teenagers will go through this in some predictable types of patterns of just losing meaning, wondering what it's all for, feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of the world to the degree that they're able to keep discovering more of it. And you can't really fully shut off the intensity and noise and loudness of this particular phase of existence. It's just everywhere. There's constant bickering and fighting and disrespect and everything else on the news, and it just seeps into everyday life. So if our day-to-day existence is challenging, what might we learn from the soul's perspective about how to navigate these tough times, but also what we might learn about why a particular incarnation or a lifetime might end abruptly by the person's own hand? A few years back, I was getting a healing by my friend Alice Bandy, who's an amazing spiritual teacher and healer. She was kind of toying with me a little bit, and she asked me if I was curious about knowing anything about my past lives. And I thought, well, who wouldn't want to know something about their past lives? And she asked me a question I'll never forget. She said, do you want to know how many times you've been a monk before? And it's a really relevant question for me because as a householder in the yoga path, it can be very difficult to balance my household responsibilities and building a life with being on the spiritual path. The further you travel down the spiritual path, it can kind of become a razor's edge. It becomes more demanding and more disciplined at times, to the point where you never quite feel that you are doing enough. It's a lot of expectations we put on ourselves to manage it. And the teachers that I follow, by the way, and the Paramahansa Yogananda's path, and certainly Yogananda, would never ever project those negative pressures onto us, because he resides in a full state of bliss at all times with God. And God doesn't want us to feel terrible or separate from our souls either. But human beings on this plane of existence, seeing through the filters of our five senses, seeing through the filters of media, and through our monkey brains that want to protect us from every small little fear that may or may not exist, we tend to blow things out of proportion. Certainly I saw this coming up over the last couple weeks in how we were processing the way that Zach passed. You kind of move through, we are terrible friends, we should have reached out more, to how could he do this? This is so confusing. And talking to his twin brother, he seemed to echo some of those same stages. By the way, this is not intended to speak in any way on behalf of the family or friends of Zach. This is just my perspective. So if our brains are determined to gravitate towards fear, and our bodies are navigating this fairly sketchy plane of existence where there's a lot of turbulence and a lot of fear, what perspective might our soul take? How I like to think about it is that the soul resides in a place I call what could be. It's our full potential. Deepak Chopra calls it the field of pure potentiality. The soul resides there, and it's always waiting for us to catch up. I don't know if you've experienced this when you move to a new house, but when we moved into this house, when we finally got the keys and finally got settled, I realized that my soul had moved here at least weeks, if not months, or maybe a year in advance, and it was waiting for my little meat suit body a mile away to catch up with it, to feel worthy of living here. And just recently, as a couple of days ago, I realized that now when I cut the grass and take care of the yard, I don't feel like I'm taking care of some rich guy's yard anymore. I finally feel like we're growing into this place and not feeling so freaked out about taking care of it. What that signals to me is that my soul is saying, wow, thanks for catching up finally. This is something you deserved. And a lesson that Dr. Michael Lennox gave me a couple years back during a reading when we were getting settled here, still figuring out, wow, can the income stabilize so we could pay for all of it? And Dr. Michael Lennox said, it's a total fallacy to think that God would give you the house and not give you the means to pay for it or to provide for it. So if the soul resides in pure potential, or what could be, our job is to navigate from what is, from our current reality, into this place of possibility. And all I could think of is that a particular life or a particular person who runs out of possibility or doesn't have access into hope anymore for a prolonged period of time, sees no possibility there, and they just get totally immersed and overwhelmed in what is, it does become a viable option to just hit time out, go back to the source, go back to bliss, go back to the joy found in spirit. And from our limited perspective, we can't know the exact path back to God other than stopping the pain or stopping all the fear or all the overwhelm permanently. This is in no way to condone it or even to accept it. as a viable way of ending a lifetime. But if we think about how painful it is to be so separated from our souls for so long and not feel those warm, rippling, percolating vibes of knowing that we are on the right track, that we are loved, that we are supported, that everything truly will be okay, that everything at all moments is truly better than okay. It's by divine order. If we completely lose sight of that and we feel like we're in it ourselves and we have to fix everything and it's broken beyond repair, it's easy to understand why we might want to end it. A few years back, Dave Matthews was interviewed after the death of their sax player Leroy Moore, and Leroy was an incredibly talented musician, as all the members of Dave Matthews Band are. But Dave was saying that it was really interesting to notice how Leroy's passing made him see that when people pass away that you love and care for and spend so much time with, all of their challenging parts of their personality and their kind of neuroses and fears and angers and the parts that were kind of the pain in the ass part of being human just fall away. And all that you're left with is this beautiful memory, this beautiful imprint of that person on your life. What I know from studying some ontological coaching is that we have this thing called the survival mechanism, which are kind of projections of the ego, just the default patterns and stories that we use to reinforce our perspective as a way to protect us throughout our lives. It's kind of beautiful if you think about it, that all of that falls away at the time of passing and you're just left with the essence of the person. So when we were at the Celebration of Life event for our friend Zach, it was incredible to hear just how many lives he affected through his love of food and love of gathering other people and his creativity and just his love of music and just the art of being an amazing human. It's just a really beautiful thing. It's sad to think that many of us can live for prolonged periods of time without access to knowing what our true essence is and get caught up in thinking that our only identity is the ego or the survival mechanism. And, you know, the most common recurring story in all of ours, myself included, is that we are not enough, that we are not doing enough, that we are unworthy of the love or the impact or whatever that may be that we're seeking. So then what becomes access to glowing in the dark? We are in dark times. Where do we go from here? Fortunately, the guru of Paramahansa Yogananda, Swami Sri Yukteswar, wrote this book called The Science of Religion. And in this book, he maps out these giant cycles of consciousness that rise and fall throughout human existence. And if you think about these in terms of big 2,400-year blocks of time that go into downward cycles where the consciousness lowers, and probably the peak bottom of this was during the Dark Ages when everyone was dying of the plague and people were violent and unorganized and very dogmatic. And we are only maybe about 300 years on an upswing of the rising of consciousness. And I think most of us can feel this. Most of us can feel more hope, more joy, more possibility, more just blown away by whether it's medical miracles or technology or the whole world getting connected. It's truly an amazing time to be alive if you're blessed to stay focused on these things that give us meaning and give us hope. Something I'm learning about glowing in the dark that I think is, an absolute requirement that I wasn't aware of when I was a kid is that serving others and connecting to others and supporting others is probably the biggest piece of the puzzle. So I don't know if it's truly helpful to glow in the dark on our own if we're not using that power that's generated to uplift others or to support others or to put people in a better place as a collective. And a lot of the guests that I've been interviewing lately, these leaders that create cultures at their company, these spiritual teachers who are going out to help other people awaken and uplift and create a business out of it. All of these are great examples to borrow from, and we could all do this in our own ways by finding and claiming and using our authentic voice, centering yourself and sharing your truth with another person, face to face, not through the phone, looking in their eyes and transmitting some of that glow that you have to them and acknowledging theirs and letting them know that you see it. Ask from an authentic place, what can you do to help them? What can you do to support their becoming? So I don't think glowing in the dark happens in a vacuum. I think it takes others, and it takes the ability and willingness to be seen and fully heard and understood by others. So what have we learned? What are some of the powerful lessons that I mentioned earlier that I've learned from this experience? The obvious is to treasure our friendships. There's no guarantee that they're going to continue tomorrow even. A lot of us experience loss. My friend Layla down in Florida Keys, she was telling me how so many people have taken their lives since Hurricane Irma blew through there at the end of 2017, I believe. For such a small community to have lost so many people to suicide, she personally knew 7 people over the past year closely that have taken this route because life is so incredibly hard after a disaster like that. But we have to treasure every moment we have with our friendships and be highly intentional. Don't forego the plans or wait on them assuming they're going to happen next summer, but to actually plan the stuff out and just host and pull away from the work sometimes. I had a client recently, very successful man, reflect to me that he was going to start getting much more intentional with his friendships, to play that game that we hear a lot about. I don't know if it was a Zig Ziglar quote, but a lot of people promote this, that we become the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. So naturally people want to game the system and hang out with people that challenge us and inspire us. And we should, because there is definite truth to it. But what I realized in coming back into contact with friends from over the years that I may have lost touch with was that maybe I was being too strategic in leaving my Midwest comfortable friendships behind and moving on to bigger, vaster territories. And there's very good reasons why people grow apart too. There's vibrational dissonance, and we communicate at different levels sometimes. Not that anyone is better or worse, they're just different vibes. I'm starting to see my part in that, where I realized that I didn't always take the time to learn everything I could from everybody I grew up with, and I realized how I held myself separate again. Maybe we need to let go, or at least keep this thing in check of having a strategy around up-leveling all of our friendships all the time. I truly believe that everyone comes into our lives at a particular time for a particular reason. We don't need to hang on to them forever, but there is a lot of just power in being around people that have known us forever, who truly see us, not only our deficiencies, but all of our magic and all of the growth we've experienced. We need to remind every single person we know just how important they are to us, and that they are valued and that they are loved and cared for. I don't know that we can truly stop anybody from taking this course of action. All we could do is stay in conversation. One of the things I learned last year in a very powerful way is if somebody does mention that they think about killing themselves, or that mentions the word suicide, the first question you should ask them is if they have a plan, like how they're going to do it. Because most people will tell you exactly what they've been thinking. And if they do, you just call 911 if there is any plan in place. So it's just something to think about. I was totally stumped. I had no idea what to do, but I guess that's what they do on suicide prevention lines, is the first thing they'll ask is, how are you going to do it? And one of the last things, just to come full circle on it, is to give ourselves and everyone around us all 3 permissions to just relax and chill, take it easy, to be as messy or as vulnerable or as angry or as sad as they need to be, and to not just completely hold that against them, but to honor them for their humanity. And then finally 3, to self-actualize, to fully express, to figure out how we could possibly support them in them becoming the best version of themselves. Keep that whole cycle working of all of us collectively glowing in the dark.
What if I'm only one of many, and there's others out there who've been waiting for me? Our grid of blinding light stretches worldwide. As one we rise, as one we shine.
I want to share something one of my Facebook friends and teachers and fellow facilitators and coaches. This guy's amazing. I worked with him in Costa Rica the last couple of years at retreats. His name is Rodolfo Carrillo, and he shared his story, and I would have had no idea that he had any sadness or darkness anywhere in his life, because this guy is such a blazing beam of light at all times. Just to be around him gives you a contact buzz. But he shared this on April 12th, and a few days later we would learn about Zach. He said, 20 plus years ago I was suicidal. Tired of the pain and suffering, I was ready to end my life in two very specific moments that I will always remember. Those nights I had the privilege of having two beautiful souls next to me that didn't leave my side. Their presence saved my life. In the past 2 years, 3 very dear friends have committed suicide. It's been really hard to deal with the fact that I wasn't able to be there for them in a way that could help them overcome their suffering. I've dealt with the guilt, and though it has given me deep pain, after my own episodes I learned the tools to be able to deal with the grief and move on. But I think it's time for all of us to address the causes of so much suffering that is happening in the world. I believe it's urgent that we stop living so disconnected, having to live up to unattainable social standards, experiencing so much financial pressure, so much running, hurrying. We need to share more love, be more compassionate, provide more emotional security to those around us, hug more, have more deep conversations, be more sincere, embrace vulnerability, support and help each other out. It all starts with each one of us. Do know that if you are sad or depressed, I am here for you. Please reach out. Thank you so much, Rodolfo. That was beautiful. And in closing, I want to acknowledge our brother Zach Hurt. Wasn't my twin brother like he's the twin of Eric Hurt, but Zach Hurt was a brother nonetheless. We were the same age. He had this just very cool, easy swagger and elegance. He was just a guy that was very quiet and loving and so sensitive, and he just kind of glided through the room, and he was always just such a gentle presence, certainly in my wife's life. And she was probably the closest to him when they knew each other literally since they were infants, but she was probably the closest to him when my wife and I were engaged and we lived in separate states. I lived out in California 20 years ago, and she was back here in Ohio still. But Zach was like a brother to her, and he looked after her, worked with her at the video store. And I'm looking at his face right now from those video store years, and Gail is standing next to him, probably with a shaved head on the side of the photo. But Zach's looking at me from my altar right now, holding a pair of chopsticks up to his eyes, probably eating Platinum Dragon, I would imagine. Zach, I want to acknowledge you as somebody that I deeply respected, I look up to in so many ways. I appreciate all of your talent and love and passion that you put into the world. And thank you for just being a great man, a great brother, a great friend. Thank you for these powerful lessons on loss and taking stock of what we have while we have the chance to enjoy it. I'm going to leave you with a chant. I didn't write the first couple lines because they're from scripture. The first 2 lines are what Sri Dayamata, who is a saint, she said that these 2 lines are 2 of the most powerful lines in all of scripture. Thy will be done, not mine. Thou art the doer, not I. It's full-on surrender to the divine will. It eases our attachment to things and reminds us that we don't have to do everything and make everything so hard and separate ourselves from our soul, because this higher aspect of our soul that we have access to is moving mountains for us if we let it. So those are the first couple lines, and then it gets into a meditation practice that our This Epic Life community may know well. It's I am the sky, watching all weather move through me. And this has offered me comfort over these last few weeks as I've watched many storms blow through and watched new sunrises and little signs. And I know that everything is not only going to be okay, but better than okay, and that summer will blaze forth again. And as Paramahansa Yogananda would say, the bird of paradise shall soon sit on the branches of our lives. So chant with me. I hope you find some peace in this if you really tune in deeply to the chants and listen to the harmonium. So sending love to you. Please go forth and hug people, hug yourself. If you're hearing my words, know that you are loved, you are appreciated, And if anyone around you may find this helpful or comforting, please, by all means, share it. Back next week with our regular format. Thanks for listening. Much love.
Thy will be done, not mine. Thou art the doer, not I am the sky, watching all weather move through me. Oh, I am the sky, watching all weather move through me. Oh, I am, what am I? I am the sky. Oh, I am, what am I? I am the sky. Thy will be done, not mine. Thou art the doer, not all I am is the sky, watching all weather move through me. Oh, I am the sky, watching all weather move through me. Oh, I am, what am I? I am the sky. Oh, I am.
This episode is, of course, dedicated to the memory and legend status of Zachary Hurt, as well as the entire Hurt and Nuevo families. Your feedback means the world to us. If you want, you could pop over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. You could also find us anywhere online at This Epic Life.